Reading through the Bible in one year, January 24th, Genesis 25, Matthew 24, Esther chapter 1, and Acts chapter 24. Now Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah, and she bore to him Zimran, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua. Now Jokshan was the father of Sheba and Dedan, and the sons of Dedan were Ashurim, and Letushim, and Lemumim. That name. And the sons of Midian were Ephah, and Epher, and Hanok, and Abida, and Eldaah. These were the sons of Keturah. And Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac. But to the sons of the concubines which Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts while he was still living, and he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the land of the east. These are the days of the years of Abraham's life that he lived, 175 years. And Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of days, and he was gathered to his people. Then his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, facing Mamre, the field which Abraham bought from the sons of Heth, or the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with Sarah his wife. Now it happened after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac lived near Beer Lahai Roi. Now these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's servant woman, bore to Abraham. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names, in order of their birth: Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, and Kedar, and Abdeel, and Mibsam, and Mishma, and Duma, and Massa, Hadad, and Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedema. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names, by their villages and by their camps, 12 princes according to their tribes. These are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. And he breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people. And they dwelt from Havilah to Shur, which is east of Egypt, as one goes toward Assyria. He settled in the face of all his brothers. Now these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban the Aramean, to be his wife. And Isaac entreated Yahweh on behalf of his wife, because she was barren, and Yahweh was moved by his entreaty. So Rebekah his wife conceived. But the children struggled together within her. And she said, "If it is so, well, then why am I this way?" So she went to inquire of Yahweh. And Yahweh said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples will be separated from your body. And one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." And her days to give birth were fulfilled, and behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came forth red all over like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau, which I believe means red. Afterward his brother came forth with his hand holding on to Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob, meaning one who takes by the heel, or supplants, or also trickster. And Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to them. And the boys grew up. Esau became a skillful hunter and a man of the field, but Jacob was a peaceful man living in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he had an appetite for hunted game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And Jacob had cooked stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. Then Esau said to Jacob, "Please give me a swallow from the red stuff, this red stuff, for I am famished." Therefore his name was called Edom, meaning red. But Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." And Esau said, "Behold, I am about to die, So what use of sorry, so of what use is the birthright to me? And Jacob said, "First swear to me." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. So Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went away. Thus Esau despised his birthright. And that is all the notes. Let's move on now to Matthew 24. And coming out from the temple, Jesus was going along, and his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. And he answered and said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another which will not be thrown down or torn down." Now, as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" They asked 3 questions. They thought that it was one. And Jesus answered and said to them, "See to it that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will deceive many. And you are going to hear of wars and rumors of wars. See to it that you are not alarmed, for those things must take place, but that is not yet the end. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes. But all these things are merely the beginning of birth pains. Then they will deliver you to tribulation, and will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. And at that time many will fall away, and will betray one another, and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise, and deceive many. And because lawlessness is multiplied, most people's love will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. And this gospel, the good news of the kingdom, shall be proclaimed in the whole world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, read the notes, they're going to help you a lot through here, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place. Let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things out, get the things out that are in his house. And whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his garment. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. But pray that your flight will not be in winter or on a Sabbath. For then there will be a great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. And unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, 'Behold, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe him. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders, so as to deceive, if possible, even the elect. For behold, I have told you in advance. Therefore, if they say to you, 'Behold, he is in the wilderness,' do not go out. Or, 'Behold, he is in the inner rooms,' do not believe them. For just as the lightning comes from the east and appears even to the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather." 2 notes here. This line about how you'll see when Jesus comes, and don't listen if somebody says, "Oh, he's over here." No, it's going to be so evident. It will be like lightning that appears in the sky. And it's so bright that it covers the entire sky. Everybody sees it. That's what he's saying. And the last line here, wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. This is a text that is aligned with a question that's asked by the disciples in other gospel accounts. Namely, they ask, well, where? Meaning, where will, and this comes right after the people are told that there will be a rapture of sorts, where the evil people will be taken away, and those who are of the elect will be left over. And they ask the question, well, where? Where will they be taken? And the response is, where the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Going on to verse 29. But immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. Then all tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send forth his angels and a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, north, south, east, and west, from one end of the sky to the other. Now, learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So, you too, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near, right at the door. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. We're going to read the note on that one right now. We'll read it from the ESV Study Bible. This is one of those texts that you have to read all the notes on. They're very important. So, quote, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Several interpretations have been offered for this difficult passage. First, some think that, quote, this generation, unquote, refers to the disciples who were alive when Jesus was speaking, and, quote, all these things, unquote, refers to the beginning but not the completion of the sufferings described in verse 4 through 25. Second, others see in, quote, all these things, unquote, a prediction with multiple fulfillments, so that Jesus' disciples will be both, quote, this generation, unquote, that sees the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, and also those at the end of the age who see the events surrounding the, quote, abomination of desolation, unquote. Third, since, quote, the generation of, unquote, in the Old Testament can mean people who have a certain quality, right? Others understand this generation to refer to either A, this generation of believers throughout the entire present age, the age of the church, as it's often stated, or B, to this, quote, evil generation, unquote, that will remain until Christ returns to establish his kingdom, as is seen in Matthew 12:45 and Luke 11:29. The fourth option, others, particularly some dispensational interpreters, understand generation to mean race. This is another sense of the Greek term genea, and think it refers only to the Jewish people who will not pass away until Christ returns. 5. Yet others understand, quote, this generation, unquote, to mean the generation that sees, quote, all these things, unquote. Namely, the generation alive when the final period of great tribulation begins. According to this view, the illustration of the fig tree shows that when the final events begin, Christ will come soon. Just as, quote, all these things, unquote, in verse 33 refers to events leading up to, but not including Christ's return. So, in verse 34, all these things refers to the same events. That is, the events described in verse 4 through 25. Let's continue. I'm going to reread verse 34. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But of that day and hour, no one knows. Not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. For just as the days of Noah were, so the coming of the Son of Man will be. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark. They did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. Then there will be two in the field. One will be taken, and the other will be left. Two women will be grinding grain at the mill, and one will be taken and the other left. Note The one who is taken away isn't Noah in the ark. Noah and the ark stay put. It's the people who are washed away. So in this case, it's the wicked who are taken away from the earth. Verse 42. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know at which day your Lord is coming. But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what time of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would have not allowed his house to be broken into. For this reason you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not think he will. Who then is the faithful and prudent slave whom his master put in charge of his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is the slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But if that evil slave says in his heart, my master's not coming for a long time, and begins to beat his fellow slaves and to eat and drink with drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect, and at an hour which he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. More of this will come tomorrow. Let's move on now to Esther chapter 1. Since we're in a new book, let's go ahead and read the introduction. The book of Esther is interesting in that it never mentions God's name. Yet God clearly orchestrated all of its events. Esther, a Jew living among the exiles in Persia, became queen of the empire at about 480 BC. Haman, a Persian official, sought to eradicate the Jewish minority, but God had prepared Esther, quote, for such a time as this, unquote, to save his covenant people. The book was written some decades later to document the origins of the Jewish observance of Purim, which celebrates Israel's survival and God's faithfulness. The author is unknown, but some believe it could have been Esther's cousin Mordecai, who is a key person in the book. Throughout the book, we see God's sovereign hand preserving his people, showing that everything is under his control. Let's begin. Now it happened in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. In those days, as King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was at the citadel in Susa, in the 3rd year of his reign, he held a feast for all his princes and servants, the military officers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of his provinces being in his presence, while he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his majesty for many days, 180 days. And when these days were fulfilled, the king held a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present at the citadel in Susa, from the greatest to the least, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were hangings of fine white and blue linen, held by cords of fine purple on silver rings and marble pillars, and couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. And drinks were served in golden vessels of various kinds, and royal wine was plentiful, according to the king's hand. And the drinking was done according to the law. There was no compulsion. For so the king had established it for each official of his household, that he should do according to what pleased each person. Queen Vashti also held a feast for the women in the royal house which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he was wasted. He sent for Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcas, the 7 eunuchs who attended to the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before her before the king with her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and the princes, for she was beautiful in appearance. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the word of the king, which was delivered by the hand of the eunuchs. Then the king became exceedingly furious, and his wrath burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for it was the custom of the king to speak, it was the custom of the king thus to speak before all who knew the law and justice, and were close to him, Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media who had access to the king's presence and sat in the first place in the kingdom. According to the law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti because she did not do the declaration of King Ahasuerus delivered by the hand of the eunuchs? Then, in the presence of the king and the princes, Memucan said, well, Queen Vashti has committed iniquity against not only the king, but also against all the princes and all the peoples who are in the provinces of King Ahasuerus, all 127. For the word about the queen will get out to all the women, causing them to despise their husbands in their eyes by saying, King Ahasuerus said for Queen Vashti to be brought into his presence, but she did not come. This day, the ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard of the word about the queen, will speak in the same way to all the king's princes, and there will be plenty of spite and indignation. If it seems good to the king, let a royal word go forth from him. Let it be written in the laws of Media and Persia, so that it cannot be repealed, that Vashti may no longer come into the presence of King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who was better than she. And the king's sentence, which he will make, will be heard throughout all his kingdom, for it is vast. And all women will give respect to their husbands, great and small. And this word was good in the eyes of the king and the princes. And the king did according to the word of Memucan. So he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each according to its script, and to every people according to their tongue. What every man should do, starting over, verse 22. So he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each according to its script, and to every people according to their tongue, that every man should be the ruler of his own house, and the one who speaks in the tongue of his people, or in the tongue of his own people. Now, Acts 24. Now, after 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders, and with an attorney named Tertullus, and they brought charges to the governor against Paul. And after Paul had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, as we have attained much peace through you, and because by your provision reforms are being carried out for this nation, we welcome this in every way and everywhere, most excellent Felix, with all thankfulness. But that I may not weary you any further, I plead with you by your forbearance to hear us briefly. For we have found this man to be a real pest, and a fellow who stirs up dissension among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of that sect of the Nazarenes. And he even tried to desecrate the temple, and then we arrested him. We're at the brackets again. So this next section is a bracketed section, meaning that it's not found in the oldest and most reliable manuscripts we have available. This states that it was probably an addition that came later. It is also stated here so that you can read through it, because again, most people kind of expect it. If you're a King James person, you expect to find this text here, because they use what was called the majority text, which was largely derived from the largest number of manuscripts they had available, not the oldest or most reliable. It was just the ones that they had most on hand, or those that had been possibly collected at the time. So because the King James was very popular, that's the one that people tend to use, and lines like this are found in it. They don't change the text itself. They don't suddenly say, well, Jesus was a walrus. It doesn't say those things. It doesn't say that we should worship, candles or any weird crap like that. But what we see instead is we just see that um, uh, we see these texts that are in here that for some people are expected. So we go ahead and leave it in there for you. So that's why it's here. I'm going to read this whole section from 6 all the way down to 8 with that text added, and then I'll read it one more time without, and I'll just continue onward. Verse 6 again. Speaking of Paul, Tertullus says, he even tried to desecrate the temple, and then we arrested him. But we wanted to judge him according to our own law. But Lysias, the commander, came along and with much violence took him out of our hands, ordering his accusers to come before you. By examining him yourself concerning all these matters, you will be able to ascertain the things of which we accuse him. And now, without the disputed text, back to verse 6 again. And he even tried to desecrate the temple, and then we arrested him. By examining him yourself concerning all these matters, you will be able to ascertain the things of which we accuse him. And the Jews also joined in the attack, asserting that these things were so. When the governor had nodded for Paul to speak, Paul replied, knowing that for many years you've been a judge to this nation, I cheerfully make my defense, since you are able to ascertain the fact that no more than 12 days ago I went up to Jerusalem to worship, and neither in the temple, nor in the synagogues, nor across the city did they find me carry on a discussion with anyone or causing a riot. Nor are they able to prove to you what they are now accusing me. But this I confess to you, that according to the way, again, Christianity, which they call a sect, I do serve the God of our fathers, believing everything that is in accordance with the law and that is written in the prophets, having a hope in God, for which these men are waiting, that there shall certainly be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous. In view of this, I also do my best to maintain a conscience without fault before God and before men. We'll touch on this quite a bit as we go through the rest of the letters. Back to the text now. Verse 17. Now, after several years, I came to bring alms to my nation and offerings, in which they found me, having been purified in the temple without any crowd or uproar. But there were some Jews from Asia who ought to have been present before you and to make accusation if they should have anything against me. Or else let these men themselves tell what wrongdoing they found when I stood before the Sanhedrin, other than for this one statement which I shouted out while standing among them. Quote, for the resurrection of the dead I am on trial before you today. Unquote. But Felix, having a more accurate knowledge about the way, again Christianity, put them off, saying, when Lysias the commander comes down, I will decide your case. Then he gave orders to the centurion for him to be kept in custody and yet have some rest, and not to prevent any of his friends from ministering to him. Brief note on that. So, you'll read in Scripture that it says that we're to take care of those who are in prison. And so people have sprung up all of these prison ministries where they have all sorts of things that they try to do for people who are in prison. And that's all well and good, and it is. But at this time, prisons aren't like they are today, where they're basically state-sponsored work camps. And I mean, yes, it's terrible. Don't get me wrong. It's a horrible place to be. But the state covers your room and your board and I mean, all of your food, all of the things that you need. In some cases, your entertainment. They cover all of these things for you. It's a horrific place. But it's very different from what they had in this time. In this time, if you were in prison, if you were locked up, you got the most meager of rations, if anything at all. It is up to your family, up to those who care for you, to come in and take care of your needs. So Paul had Christians who would come and they would bring him food, they would bring him clothing, they would bring him blankets so he would stay warm during the winter. They brought him, we've seen in the letters from Paul, we will see if this is your first time through it, that Paul asks in his letters for very specific things. He's asking for specific parchments. He's asking for letters to be sent to him. These are most likely the circular letters like his that he wasn't able to see, but he heard about. So he's asking for those to be sent to him. He's also asking for specific books and for basically the ability to continue writing papers and writing letters to other people. He's asking for those things to be brought to him while he's in prison. So this is why it says that they're not to prevent any of his friends from ministering to him. Well, these are what they're supposed to do. So when we read in the scripture about taking care of those who are in prison, it's talking very specifically about other fellow Christians. Now, if you're part of a prison ministry that just, ministers to generic people in prison, there's nothing wrong with that at all. And I don't want to build that first or make it seem like that's what I'm saying. I'm really not. But I'm just allowing you to see the biblical truth behind this that a lot of people tend to get hung up on or they misunderstand. Let's continue on. Verse 24. But some days later, Felix arrived with Drusilla, his wife, who was a Jewess, and summoned Paul and heard him speak about faith in Christ Jesus. But as he was discussing righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix became frightened and answered, Go away for the present. When I find time, I will call for you. At the same time, he was also hoping that money would be given him by Paul. Therefore, he also used to summon for him quite often and converse with him. But after 2 years had passed, again, he hadn't been accused of anything yet. He's keeping him in prison as a kind of a gift to the Jews. Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and, wishing to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul imprisoned. All right, that is all of the text and all of the reading for today, or rather all of the notes for today. God willing, we'll be back tomorrow. Behold, the word of the Lord.